I don't know how you guys do it. Neither you or Michelle.
All right, we're going to get started though.
You need to start listening to a sermon where you need 1 day of rest.
Yeah.
I try. All right. Anyway, we're going to move on now. All right. So I want to remind you of how this is the reason this is coming up. And I'll also mention that the way Moses tells this gives us some details that we don't get in Exodus. And so the discussion that we are getting into is that, remember that the ultimate discussion here is found kind of in verse 6. Know therefore that the Lord your God is not giving you this good land to possess because of your righteousness, for you are a stubborn people. Okay. And so he is giving them an example. And he says, furthermore, the Lord said to me, this is verse 13, I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stubborn people. Leave me alone that I may destroy them and blot out their name from under heaven. And I will make you a nation mightier and greater than they.
And
So-
who's he gonna make a greater nation?
Moses.
Moses.
Okay. So remember, what is going on is the golden calf. Okay. This is the specific discussion here. Is they have Moses is up on the mountain. He's been up on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. So a month and about 10 days. Okay. Receiving the law of the Lord. They come to the end of that 40 days and the children of Israel are uptight because, well, maybe Moses died, and so make us an idol to worship. And Aaron does. Okay. So then no sooner have they made an idol, they made the idol in the evening is what it appears to be. And then the next morning they rose up to have a festival to their new idol. And about midway through the festival, Moses shows up. Okay. Now, there are a few details that are important that we get into this. So he comes down with the two tablets in his arms. And he looks, and there are all the people having a party with all the sexual immorality and all the garbage that can go on. And there in the middle is this golden calf on an altar. And he says, so you had turned aside quickly from the way that the Lord had commanded you. A month. Took them a month.
Not very long.
So I looked, okay, and behold, you had sinned against the Lord your God. You'd made yourself a golden calf. This is verse 16. You turned aside quickly from the way that the Lord had commanded you. So I took hold of the two tablets and threw them out of my two hands and broke them before your eyes. Okay. He's angry. Okay.
You can't tell that.
But the other thing that is very, very important here is in his anger, he is giving them a picture of what they're doing because they are breaking the covenant. So as surely as these two tablets broke, so was the covenant broken. Okay. Then it says, then I lay prostrate before the Lord as before. Okay. So what it's saying is that during the time that this is kind of what I see it. And it's a little hard to understand. I lay prostrate before the Lord as before. And then it says 40 days and 40 nights. Okay. So the question is he saying that after he's come down from the mountain, he has not eaten anything on the mountain? He now comes down, and because of their sin, now he goes and lays prostrate again and does another 40 days and 40 nights.
Without eating and laying.
Right.
How did anybody stay alive? That'd be 80
Well,
days.
What I think is going on here is that he falls back prostrate before the Lord as he had before. And that time had been 40 days and 40 nights. Because the story in Exodus says that he falls on his face before the Lord and cries out to the Lord. And then within a very short period of time, he begins the punishment process of the children of Israel. So this is my opinion, and I'm going to make sure I say it that way because I don't know for sure. But I think that it's probably not saying that at this point he did 40 days and 40 nights here. But he had just finished 40 days and 40 nights of prayer.
Because they were already sinful.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And now
So it neither ate bread or drank water because of all the sin that you had committed. Now, the truth of the matter is, it may be such, and this is certainly the case, it may be such that whenever he is on the mountain with the Lord is providing for his sustenance.
Yeah. So he doesn't have to eat or drink because he's already.
So maybe he did eat in the presence of the Lord. We know that at one point during all of this, before he ends up going back up for 40 days and 40 nights, he goes up before the Lord with the leaders of Israel and they have a meal. So it has always been kind of the discussion that the 40 days and 40 nights up on the mountain for Moses were all fasting. But the Bible doesn't actually say that. So it may be that God provided food and water for him while he was up there. And now he comes down and he sees this because of all their sin. If the 40 days and 40 nights are after the sin has occurred, then what is going on is Moses is putting him in a position of repentance to try to save the people, which we know is how this works. Now, the thing that kind of, and like I said, it could be either one. Exodus just feels like the response is much faster than 40 days later. But it could also be that what has gone on is that Moses makes his reaction immediately. And remember that his reaction is he calls all the Levites to himself and says, who's going to stand on the Lord's side? And then he goes, now you go kill your brother, your sister, your family. Says, your family members who have sinned, you go take them out.
I thought it said that 40 days with no food and water. But it said that.
Well,
40 days without food?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's what it says.
right here it says that in this one, but I don't know that it says for sure that. Let me slip over here and look over it real quick. So we have chapter 20, chapter 21, 22. We know that it's about resurrection, social justice. Just kind of looking at Sabbath and festivals, conquest of Canaan, the covenant confirmed. The covenant confirmed in chapter 24 is come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, 70 elders of Israel. Moses alone shall come near to the Lord, but the others shall not come near. So he has the 70 elders and the priests come up onto the mountain. They come up onto the mountain, but they don't come near to the Lord. Okay. And then it says, now the appearance of the glory of Lord, this is verse 15. Moses went up on the mountain and the cloud covered the mountain. The glory of the Lord dwelt on Mount Sinai. The cloud covered it 6 days. On the 7th day, he called to Moses out of the midst of the cloud. Now the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a devouring flame on top of the mountain in the sight of the people of Israel. Moses entered the cloud, went up on the mountain, and Moses was on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. Okay, then after that, starting in chapter 25, we don't get any more narrative about what's going on with Moses. We begin to get commandments given to Moses. Lord said to Moses, speak to the people of Israel about what they're to contribute. Then the ark, the table for the bread, the golden lampstand, the tabernacle, okay, so the bronze altar, the cord of the tabernacle, the oil for the lamp, the priest's garments. Okay, so all through this, how to consecrate the priests, how to make the altar of incense, and the tax that's supposed to happen if you take a census of the people, the anointing oil and the incense. And then verse 30, chapter 31 goes into the 2 men that God is raising up to build the tabernacle, and then how to keep the Sabbath. And then in chapter 32, it says, when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together. And then we have this golden calf moment. So, but what we see happen is the Lord said to Moses, go down, for your people are, and I'm angry, I'm going to kill them all.
Mhm.
Moses immediately implores, this is verse 11, why does your wrath burn hot? Don't do that. Don't kill them all. Okay. So Moses then goes down. Joshua meets him halfway because Joshua was at the halfway point standing guard. Joshua goes, it sounds like there's war in the camp. He goes, no, it's a party. He comes down, he breaks the stone tablets. Okay, this is how it works. So he breaks the stone tablets, he talks to Aaron, he takes the calf, he burns it, he grounds it into powder and scatters it on the water of a brook that was running through the Sinai Valley, and then made the people drink it, basically, is the idea. Now, all of those details are in the Deuteronomy account, except for what happens in verse 21. Moses says to Aaron, why did you do this? Aaron says, okay, here's what. And when Moses saw that the people had broken loose, okay, they had fallen out of obedience, Moses stood at the gate of the camp and said, who's on the Lord's side? Come to me. Well, the sons of Levi gather around him. And he said to them, thus says the Lord God of Israel, put your sword on your side, each of you, and go to and fro from gate to gate throughout the camp, and each of you kill his brother and his companion and his neighbor. Okay, the sons of Levi did according to the word of Moses. About 3,000 men of the people fell. So they killed about 3,000 people in this purge. Yes.
What do you think that gold comes in?
Nothing. Gold is edible.
What is?
Yeah, there are a lot of very, very fancy restaurants will use gold in their meals.
I don't see nothing about making them drink it.
Well, but
But if they're drinking out the stream, I guess.
so verse 20, he took the calf that they had made and burned it with fire and ground it into powder, scattered it on the water, and made the people of Israel drink it. This is chapter 20 of Exodus, not the Deuteronomy passage. Okay.
I'm in the wrong.
So the 3,000 men die. And so since we're talking about this, the next day, so we have a day pass. The next day, Moses said to the people, you have sinned a great sin. Now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin. So Moses returned to the Lord and said, okay, so now if we're looking at it that way, then this would be where the second 40 days start. So he goes back on the mountain, he falls down on his face before the Lord and spends 40 days and 40 nights praying for them.
So
Okay.
God might not destroy them.
So, Moses returns, he says, they've sinned a great sin, they made for themselves gods of gold, but now if you will forgive their sin, but if not, please blot me out of your book that you have written. So in other words, if you're not going to forgive them, then go ahead and kill me. And God answers and says, whoever has sinned against me, I'll blot him out of my book. But now go lead the people to the place about which I've spoken to you. Behold, my angel shall go before you. Nevertheless, in the day when I visit, I will visit their sin upon them. And it says, then the Lord sent a plague on the people because they made the calf, the one that Aaron made. Okay, so what appears to be when you match the two up, so we'll get into this. If Moses did do another 40 days on it, and looking at it again, that makes sense that that's probably what happened. He finishes 40 days of trying to help the people. And then at the end of that, God goes, no, I'm still going to punish them. I'm not going to wipe them all out, but I am going to punish them. And then there's another plague, which kills another group of people. Okay.
Why do you think Aaron made the calf? I mean, if he was Moses' right-hand man helping him,
But
he knew better.
yeah,
Was he trying to take Moses' place?
No.
Leadership?
well, we don't know for sure. Okay, but let me make sure that say that we don't know. It is an interesting discussion to look at the dynamic of Moses and Aaron. Okay. Why did Aaron have the position he had?
His Moses' brother.
Was
Yeah.
his brother, but he was also his spokesperson because
Right.
Moses couldn't speak good.
Well,
He
was it
was
really
teacher.
because Moses couldn't speak good, or because Moses was
He
not
wa-
willing
he
to
didn't
do
want
what
to.
God told him?
Yeah.
Okay, so understand that what we see happen, and it goes all the way to Exodus chapter 3. Okay. Moses gets to the burning bush. God gives him all of the details that go on. And Moses goes, "Oh, I don't think I'm the right guy. I don't think I'm the right guy. I don't think I'm the right guy." And God gives him more and more
You're
and more.
mistaken.
And finally he goes, "Well, who made man's mouth? Don't you think I can use your mouth no matter how well you speak?" And then
Wish he'd shut mine some.
but then Moses still is like, "Please send somebody else."
Yeah.
Says, "Okay, your brother Aaron's on his way to meet you." Okay, so Aaron is with Moses through all of the Egypt stuff.
Right.
And is kind of the right-hand man. Okay. They cross the Red Sea. And during this period of time, there's an interesting dynamic that's going on. Aaron's no longer the right-hand man.
Who is?
Joshua. Joshua is the one who goes up with Moses up the mountain. Joshua is the one who, okay. Now, that is not to say there are some books that take that into account and say that that's part of the reason he did this. It is more likely that he did not want the job at all. And so what happens? Well, he's trying, and some books try to say that what he's doing is he's trying to show them how ridiculous what they're asking for is. Wait, we have this God up on the mountain. Well, look, there's the God on the mountain, and here's
A cow.
your calf. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that assessment of it. I think that it is simply this, that he was desperately trying to hold everybody together. And he thought, well, the only way I'm going to keep them all here is to give them what they want. There are definitely some elements within the life of Moses, in the life of Aaron, that show that while he was a good priest, and as he got further into his priestly duties, he became an incredibly righteous man, that at this point he is a little bit of a child still. Okay, because remember that we also have the fact that he clearly didn't manage his household all that well, because what do his oldest two sons do?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
They're unwilling to follow God's way, and they get killed by God.
Yep. For making strange fire.
For making strange fire before the Lord. Now, the important element of this, and by the way, is a critical element in all of this. There is only one Old Testament character that has and I'm going to say it this way, that has anywhere near a large amount of information about him. There is only one Old Testament figure that you don't find some kind of incredibly major character flaw. Okay. And that's Daniel. Now, part of that is when it's written. Okay. Daniel is just, when you look at the book of Daniel, it just looks like Daniel's the most righteous man on earth. Okay. But every other major biblical character, you find really bad decisions Okay. Adam, Noah. Okay. So what was Noah's bad decision? After the flood, he was a drunkard. So remember the story after the flood. Now some of that is that there is a definite possibility in the way the Bible even explains it is that fermentation did not occur before the flood. That wine was not in existence before the flood. But either way, he imbibed so much that he passed out. And his youngest son comes in and sees him naked. Okay. Now it's mainly presented as an issue with that son, but the truth of the matter is Noah getting himself so drunk that he's laying on the floor naked is an issue. Okay. So we go forward and we look at Abraham. Okay. What's Abraham's issue? Abraham's issue is a lack of faith for God to protect him. Because what does he do twice? He tells some foreign leader that his wife is his sister. Now the funny thing is she was. He's not lying about it. She is technically a half sister. And so we go in and go, oh, that's gross. At the time, that was normal.
Right, yeah.
We had to repopulate parents.
Well, really, it wasn't
Well-
until like the 1940s that they passed a law you could marry your cousins like that.
Right. Now
So
the Bible speaks against it
Oh, does it?
in the New Testament, and I would have to remember why. Okay. But what is the point? Well, when you started with 8 people,
Yeah, you don't have a whole lot of choice.
and so understand that it was not necessarily said that was a great thing, but that was allowed because of the situation they were in. But twice his wife almost becomes another person's wife, and God nearly destroys the people because Moses won't be honest that she's his wife.
Yeah.
Okay. So then we go forward and we look at Isaac. Well, Isaac didn't handle his children and his wife well. Jacob is kind of the ultimate scoundrel. Then, 11 of the brothers sell the other one into slavery.
Yep.
And then the one that got sold into slavery had a big head because of his dreams.
Yep.
The first set of dreams he interprets, it's very clear. He has a big head about it. So then we go forward, we go 400 years into the future, and then we come to Moses. Well, what's Moses's big one? He tried to take God's way into his own when he killed the Egyptian. By the way, happened again. That's why he can't go into the promised land. He struck a rock God told him to talk to. He got angry and took matters into his own hands. Well, Aaron, certainly for the first little bit, is kind of weak-willed. But God still uses him in a mighty way. Well, why would the Bible do that? Why would the Bible speak of these men that are supposed to be our heroes this way?
Because we are all acting in some way.
Okay.
We are all weak in some area.
So that's the first reason.
I think it's so that we can relate to them. Like
Okay. Right.
if I'm like weak and I mess up a lot, then I'm not alone.
And you can be forgiven.
And you
Yeah.
can be forgiven.
Okay. That's the first reason. There's another. It's an interesting point of contrast.
That he can bring you from here to here.
Well,
and use it.
that's part of it, but that's kind of the same one we've already talked about. The other one is the comparison between all of these men and Jesus.
Yeah.
Well, nobody stand up to Jesus.
Right. But understand, okay, watch. This is such a powerful discussion. The man after God's own heart, the man that God chose, God's chosen one. By the way, that word in Hebrew would be Messiah, the anointed one, the chosen one. Okay. And let me be fair. There are a couple of people who are named as kind of a Messiah in the Old Testament. One of them is not Jewish.
But that's not a defamation.
No.
Okay.
So the word Messiah means anointed one.
Okay.
Okay. So understand, and by the way, this is part of this discussion too. The character of David, who is the anointed king, he is the man after God's own heart. And while I don't think, I'm not sure there's a spot where it actually calls him his Messiah, but that's the idea. He's my man.
Yeah.
Okay. David is the best that humanity could offer. That's kind of the discussion. Okay. So understand that whenever you get into the king line of Israel, you have the first king is the king like all the other nations would have. Saul.
Mhm.
Saul is a king like everybody else had. He was the kind of king they wanted.
Oh, but not what they needed.
So that was what Saul was what they asked for.
Mhm.
Remember, because how did they approach it?
We want one like the other.
We want one like all the other nations have.
Careful what you ask for.
Okay, so God gave it to them. And God said, they've rejected me. Because who was supposed to be their king?
Mhm.
God.
Yeah.
Okay. God finally comes to the point where he rejects Saul completely. And he removes his own spirit from Saul. And he moves it to David. And it's clear that the discussion is David is the kind of king I wanted you to have.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay. David is faithful. He is brave. He is decisive. Okay. He's winning back victories for the Lord. He is focused on what God wants him to do. All of these things. And then you suddenly come to the point. And by the way, this is a very interesting dynamic to all of this. From the point in 1 Samuel where we first meet David to 2 Samuel chapter 11, everything goes great for David. David is living his best life. What happens in 2 Samuel chapter 11?
He saw the ceiling.
Saw Bathsheba up on the roof taking a bath. From 2 Samuel chapter 11 to the end of David's story, he has nothing but catastrophe.
Mhm.
Okay, so watch. David is the picture of what God wanted the king to be, but as a man, he couldn't live up to God's standard.
Right.
Okay, now we come to Matthew. Matthew expresses Jesus in a very specific way. Okay, the first way he expresses him, Matthew's Jewish. He's writing to a Jewish audience. So the first thing that Matthew equates Jesus to is he's the new David. He's the better version of David. Okay. He is the fulfillment of the prophecy that David said, that God said, one of your lineage will be king forever. So finally, we've come to the righteous king out of David's line.
Mhm.
Okay. But he's not just the new David. He's also the new Moses. Okay. And we've talked about this a few times as we've gone through Exodus and Leviticus and Deuteronomy. In Matthew chapter 5, where is Jesus when he's delivering the sermon?
On top of the
He's
mountain.
He's on top of the mountain.
Yeah.
Okay. Luke gives a very similar,
Version.
but where's Jesus?
Bottom of
He's at the
mountain.
foot of the hill and the people are up the mountainside. Okay. Now it's not exactly the same. And so I think it's probably two different events. But why does Matthew choose the one where Jesus is on top of the mountain? Because what is the Sermon on the Mount? It's a re-giving of the 10 Commandments.
Oh, yeah.
very clearly, right? He starts out and he says, blessed are you if you do these things. And then he says, your righteousness has got to be better than the religious leaders. And then he starts in with this, and you've heard it said, thou shalt not kill. But I tell you, if you hate your brother, you've already killed him. Thou shalt not commit adultery. But I tell you, if you look at a woman with lust, you've already committed adultery with her. He's upping the stakes of the 10 Commandments. Which, by the way, is the reason that at the end of chapter 7, it goes, they're like, wow. He doesn't teach like all the rest of these guys. Because all the rest of these guys looked back at the 10 Commandments and what every other rabbi had said about the 10 Commandments and presented that. Jesus goes, I know that you've heard the 10 Commandments. Now let me tell you what the real standard is. He elevates. And so they say he teaches like he has some kind of authority. Well, he does. He's the new Moses. And remember that as we went through Leviticus and Numbers, what did we learn about Moses? That was untrue of every other prophet. That was untrue of David. That was untrue of almost every Old Testament figure. What?
He met face to face with God.
God spoke to him face to face. See, there's a place in Korah's rebellion, or right before Korah's rebellion. It's when Miriam and Aaron come and chastise Moses because he married a foreigner. Okay, he married a foreign woman, and they came to chastise him. And God makes Moses and Aaron's sister a leper for 24 hours. But what he says is, I know you guys think you're prophets, but I talk to prophets in dreams and visions. I talk to Moses like a friend. Now, remember, new Moses. What is it that Jesus so often says? I and the Father are one. I hear what the Father says and I do it. I see what the Father's doing and I do it. Jesus doesn't have the same type of relationship with the Father that every other person in the Old Testament, including Moses. But that's part of the discussion, is that Moses's relationship with God mirrors, in a sense, it's a dim mirror, Jesus's relationship with God. And near the end of Moses's life, there is a discussion about another one coming who will have a relationship with God like Moses. Well, who is it? It's Jesus. So Matthew says, you remember that guy they said was coming? He's the new Moses. You remember that guy that they said was coming after David? That's him. He's the new David. Okay. Jesus is, and by the way, this is very much a true discussion. We have three major character groups within the religious leaders and the righteous men of the Old Testament. Okay, you have prophet, you have priest, and you have king. Jesus is all three. Okay, the prophet speaks on behalf of God what God has to say to his people. Jesus does that. The priest provides atonement for the people. Jesus does that on the cross. The king leads the people, guides the people, rules over the people. Jesus does that not so much in his first coming, but we know in his second coming, he will be what? What is the name that is on him whenever he returns? King over every king, Lord of every other Lord. And by the way, that is a phrase, and no, that we see in the Bible, it says King of Kings, Lord of Lords. And we just think, oh, neat title. But what does that mean? He is the king who rules over every other king. He's the Lord who rules over every other Lord, which, by the way, was the whole point in Israel. Why was Saul a king like every other nation had? Because he refused to accept the kingship of God over him. David believed that God was king and he was just the guy under. Okay, now, as long as he believed that, he did really well. But it was whenever he started to get a little big for his britches and go, well, I am the king.
Why can't I have her?
So that is a major element within all of this, is the fact that when we look at the way Moses and Aaron deal with God, Moses spoke to God face to face. Aaron got to see the reflection a few times. Now, as his priestly duties, as he became more and more of the high priest, there are a couple times where the glory of the Lord comes down, but not in the same way as Moses. So there are a lot of issues with this moment of the golden calf. But to be honest, we don't know exactly what Aaron's motivations were.
Yeah.
But to be completely fair, probably more than anything is he was afraid the people were going to riot if he didn't do what they told him. And so he caved. He chose not to follow God and instead chose to follow the people, which, by the way, is one of the major elements of sin all through the Bible. Because if you go all the way back to Genesis chapter 3, let's make sure that we don't miss this. The serpent talks to Eve and he deceives her. And it says that she took a bite of whatever the fruit was. And then there's this really interesting phrase that we often miss. And she gave some to her husband who was with her. She didn't have to go hunt him down.
Yeah.
He had heard the whole conversation
And he was still.
and had not tried to protect her.
Mhm.
Now, by the way, we don't know that he didn't say anything. But what we do know is this: whenever the sin takes place, okay, so what is really the discussion here? Adam had a choice. He could follow God or he could follow his wife. Now, in biblical discussion, what was he supposed to do? He's supposed to lead his wife.
Yeah.
But he chose to follow his wife instead of following God, which then when you see the curses come up, notice this weird phrasing in most English Bibles. It says your desire will be for your husband, but he will rule over you. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, what it really means is that from that point on, there will be a struggle to see who's in charge. Your desire will be for your husband's position, but he will rule over you. And let's be completely fair. That is one of the major causes in marital strife today, is that there's a positional jockey to figure out who's going to wear the pants. Right. And how many times we say, well, I wear the pants because she knows I don't look good in a dress. But
I've always heard he wears pants, but I tell him how to put them on.
And so, but understand that before that, and there's another interesting element to this. Okay. He names all the animals. Okay. He doesn't actually name Eve until after the fall. It says he calls her woman because she was taken out of man.
Yeah.
He describes her.
Yeah.
But it is after the fall that he goes, your name is Eve. To name someone means that you have authority over them. Right?
So what does Eve mean?
So it means mother, I think or I would have to go back and look. It's been a while since I've looked at that. Hold on just a second. Let me see if I can figure it out.
I never realized that.
I hadn't either.
I thought she was always called Eve.
Yeah. Mhm.
So Eve is Eve is a female name derived from the Hebrew name Hawa, which is related to the word to live. So Eve is the mother of life.
Yeah. Okay. I could see. Okay. I hadn't realized though he hadn't named her.
But that was not. And so, there are some questions as to how much of a difference that really makes. but it is definitely a part of the discussion. That he calls her woman, and then after the fall, he names her Eve.
More or less,
And
I
the
think
claim,
the
I
right
guess.
word. He's showing that he is
Mhm.
over her.
And that is part of what the curse says. It says that he will, now remember, the curse says he will have to work hard to provide food. Okay. She will have pain in childbirth, and she will seek to usurp her husband's position, but he will rule over her. I heard a pastor jokingly go that during that thing that they each had the opportunity to admit what they had done, and instead they blamed it on somebody else. And so he goes, he blames her, she blames the serpent, and the serpent didn't have a leg to stand on. But there is a very real discussion of that we see the very nature of sin through that first, what was the sin? Well, it was disobeying God. But as soon as they did it, they had an opportunity to say, yes, I did this. And instead, what do they immediately do? They start to pass it off, which is further down that path of sin. They had already rationalized why they did it. So when we look at this, the idea is that, and so let's move back to Deuteronomy. The idea is that they were so stubborn, okay, they were so unwilling to bow, that God had to really, really step on them a few times. Mm-hmm. And he's saying, so just make sure that you don't get a big head again when you get into the land, because I'm going to fight for you, because it's not because of who you are, it's because of who I am. Okay. So then chapter 10 begins, at that time the Lord said to me, cut for yourself 2 tablets of stone like the first, come up to me on the mountain and make an ark of wood. I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets that you broke, and you shall put them in the ark. So the idea here is that so he makes the second tablets, and they go in the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the question that comes in here is the Ark of wood that we're talking about the Ark of the Covenant here, or is it that he made a box to fit the 2 stone tablets, and then they went in that box that then went in the Ark of the Covenant? We don't know the answer to that. Okay. But he wrote on the tablets the same writing as before. Okay. And he goes on. And then as we move forward, it just continues to talk about the fact that, remember how this all worked, what Moses is doing and what he will continue to do as we start next time. What he's continuing to do is say, hey, make sure you remember how little you followed me. Make sure to remember what happened when you didn't follow me and what happened when you did follow me. Okay. In fact, when we get to verse 12 comes the first time this discussion. Circumcise your heart. Okay. This is a major thing in the New Testament, but understand that God is already saying, hey, I know that you've all circumcised that thing, but you need to do better. You need to cut off the foreskin of your heart so that you're open to me.
I got a question.
Yes.
What we're reading is Moses going through all this with the
People.
new generation of people,
Yes.
right? Because these people are already dead and gone.
So yes.
About, right? Okay.
So
And
this is Moses. Right? Yes.
Okay.
This is Moses going through the entire history of the people, kind of in brief.
With the new people.
With the next generation, right before they go into the land, so that they all know what they're supposed to do and what they're not supposed to do. Now, as we get a little further, he's also going to say, oh, let me make sure to mention to you also, here's what will happen if you do obey. Here's what will happen if you don't.
So they don't want to not obey.
So there's a lot more to this. Deuteronomy is a rich, rich book. I've mentioned this to you guys before, but most scholars believe, because of what he does afterwards, that whenever you see Josiah receive the book of the law, that what he received was a copy of Deuteronomy, because the changes he makes, the things he does, are all directly related to things that Moses tells the people in Deuteronomy.
Mm.
Okay, so there is a real belief that what the temple people brought to Josiah and said, "Hey, you need to read this,"
Was just the first
was
draft.
no, it would have been final draft, but it would have been a copy of the book of Deuteronomy. In fact, if you go through and you read the entire history from Joshua to the end of Kings, they're often called the Deuteronomic history, because it seems like the book of Deuteronomy and all the things that he told them to do and not to do, and all this is what happens if you follow, this is what happens if you don't, and all of that seems to be the primary impetus of the entire writing, is to remind the Jews that, hey, back in Deuteronomy, he told you this, and notice how every time
It just amazes me how quick they forget.
but we do the same thing.
I was gonna say,
Yeah,
and then we do the same
totally.
thing.
All right, we're going to stop right there. We'll pick up at chapter 10. And I know we chased a long rabbit, but it was important.
Learned a lot. It's just like when